questions?
It's interesting because for all three of those pieces I can think of pieces of music which do very, very similar things. It's really interesting that it's sort of exploring that. Like especially the second one was like a fugue, almost like a musical canon where we have like two things going at the same time.
I mean,
and what you're doing with pitch there. As well. I thought that was really interesting.
A lot of the ideas from that actually came, they come out
of
the. Yeah, because music is kind of a blind spot for me. A lot of the ideas that I'm interested in come from either other artists, novelists, but as well as poets. But musicians is a bit of a blind spot. But basically, I was trying to take that short phrase and to create a structure from it, which would expand and then contract. And so there's a mathematical basis to that, which I can't quite remember now, but it was definitely in there. And the thing about the pitches was that the source text, if you like, had these, it had italicized words, and so the question was, well, this is a marking in the source, and how do you interpret that marking? So really, it comes back to the thing that we've already talked about interpretation. There's no fixed way to interpret something which is meant to be given emphasis in a written text. So you're free to choose, and that pitch thing sort of developed in performance. Actually, I didn't kind of think, oh yes, it's got to be about that, but the way of giving something. When we're talking about with the composer we worked with about is it Sprechstimme?
Yeah.
And then the move from that into song with sung song. Yeah.
So there's a John Cage piece that I was thinking of from a set of pieces called Living Room Music, and they read out this poem. I think it's by Pound or Murray, someone else. But the text is like, once upon a time the world was round and you could go on it, and they do all this like, oh, once upon a time, and there's when else it's like time, all this kind of stuff, and it's like, it's interesting that you sort of write something but from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, I haven't heard of that John Cage, so yeah. Living Room Music.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up on Saturday was this idea of familiarity and then encounter. And I was thinking that last time around, I was thinking of Holly's piece too. What happens when the collaborative process becomes investigative in a way? That one of the things that you're doing is encountering voice between the three of you and exploring it. And I was thinking that there's something rather interesting going on there to do with analog. That you're returning back to a kind of an analog registering or recording of a voice. And I was thinking, Holly, whether you could say a couple of things about what you did with your thing last year, which was, because originally you were going to have an old gramophone on the stage, weren't you? And eventually the gramophone got thrown away because we couldn't do it with more. But you were investigating.
I think it was more that by the time we'd come round, we'd put the gramophone into us and a good friend.
Robert.
Mickey. No, it wasn't Robert. It was Victor. He'd absorbed the gramophone by then, and we were interested in analog and outmoded media, as me and Jamie are when we write together, and we wanted to get this idea that there would be a grain in his voice, that he would have that sort of scratch of a gramophone record in the song. There would be that sort of friction that you get with a vinyl or a tape even, between the listener and the performance on the stage, and so it's embedded in the music in a way, that sort of that grain or that scratch that you get with analog. Is that
Yeah. Any other?
From the point of view of the singers, I don't know. For me, being kind of launched into the middle of James' text, which I quite often am. You kind of find yourself in this text, and it's the only kind of experience of it I've got. I've never done anything which requires reading a script or anything I haven't written, and especially when we're reading together, there's something really interesting about it's your voice, but you've got this text that isn't you. But then the things you do, it's not about expression, it's just about how you write your voice into the text. And when it's more clear to me when we're reading the buildings together, because the things we instinctively do so we can hear our own voice in what we're reading, and it's just so I can hear it in difference to you, just because otherwise I lose track of where I am. So I have to make my voice sound as different as I can, because it's so similar otherwise, isn't it?
Yeah, I think.
But yeah, those kind of strange instinctive moves you make, so you're constantly writing over what you've got written in front of you. I don't know if that's an experience you've got, but it goes back to what we were saying about whether you actually need how much of a reading of it pre-reading you have, or how much is in that instinctive moment every time.
One of the nice things about reading pieces which are for multiple voices, or taking part in that kind of reading, is that you have to be much more aware of the environment around you. I mean, when I'm reading a poem normally, it's just for me. I mean, to an extent, you sort of try and respond to what's going on, but there's also, you just like, I don't want to get this wrong, and that kind of stuff. But actually, when you're concentrating on the other voices around you, it does take you outside yourself. It's not just the writing process in which you get taken outside of your sort of solipsistic self, but actually in performance, which is really nice. So I do like that.
Can I ask a question? From the audience perspective, and maybe it's the unfamiliarity to it, I found that quite scary, particularly the first one. I don't know why, I have no idea. But was that one of your intentions, to slightly unnerve people, or was that totally just being slightly odd?
Well, I mean, the subject matter is to do with partially to do with paranoia and end of the world, and and there's all sorts of. I mean, in its early days, radio was all tied up with spiritualism and contacting the dead, all this kind of stuff, and and to hear your own voice coming out that thing, even for me, is a bit strange. But yeah, I mean, I think that was part of, when we've done this as a sort of fuller performance, and we've had like a whole desk filled with radios. To play those small short excerpts that we've pre-recorded, and it's meant to tap into sort of ideas about kind of experiments. The sci-fi basically, 50s sci-fi. That theme. So yeah, I don't think you misheard that, but again, I mean, it's like, comes back to what Stephen was saying, within the context of a poetry reading, this is a very circumscribed kind of thing that you're dealing with. It's like a concert hall, people go there with certain expectations. And, I mean, they talk about all these happenings in the 60s where people had blood thrown on them. I haven't been to anything as good as that. But, it's kind of, yeah, it's a safe space. I don't think anything, but I don't know, maybe not. I mean, what do you think? How scary is it? Is it?
When I say scary, it's like it's got aspects of a horror film to it. I know that sounds a bit strange. I suppose it's the whole, because when it was particularly the radio recording and the kind of slight, even though you use different pitches of tone in your poems, particularly the building one, it had that slightly monotonal, I can only describe it, sort of consistent background to it. And it sounds really strange. I don't know why I'm saying this, but this is how it felt from my point of view. That it had this kind of quite foreboding sort of essence to it. And then in the radio one, it just, I suppose it reminds me of that film where Will Smith, he's like the last one alive in New York. And he just, what's it called?
I Am Legend.
That's the one. And it just kind of had that really, and I think it actually is from my experience of films, using radio like that to radio to, is anyone out there kind of thing, and maybe that's what it taps into. That's why I associate with that, with being slightly
That's exactly the subject material we're working. Jenny and I did a whole poetry reading called I'm the Last Man Alive, and it was about, we were imagining that this was the last poetry reading ever, or we were the only ones left on the planet, or something like that. It was better than that.
You had to do it.
I mean, I think it's great that you pick up on that. I think because that is so. It is absolutely in not just the sound of your voice, but the medium, and exactly the instantly you're tapping into a kind of tradition of these kind of 3-minute warning kind of that genre, or protect and survive, or And if anyone's ever seen those
Yeah.
terrifying films from the 80s, I think, aren't they? Yeah, late 70s, early 80s, which were designed to be played in the event of nuclear. If you go to the Imperial War Museum in Salford, they have them playing there. But exactly that, and it's in the sense you're kind of appropriating that, just the manner of delivery as much as anything else. And even if the actual the words that you're using are not of that.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to analog as well, the idea of an outmoding technology, and radio's been around in the same form. I mean, if you leave digital aside for a moment, but it's been around in the same form for over 100 years, nearly 120 years, and 110 years. And so this thing has been with us all this time, and the possibilities of a medium which is so kind of unchanging, and I think that's one of the things that we're kind of interested in.
I'm sure I brought this up last year, James. There's a really fantastic piece which I really recommend to the composers, if you don't know it, by Yanis Kyriakidis, called A Conspiracy Cantata, which is based on Cold War messages from the various security services, and all of they often were preceded by tunes.
Number stations.
Exactly, number stations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's a really good thing, actually I just sent it to Stephen for the link to the bibliography called the Connect Project.
Right.
Code with a T on the end. And they've recorded, these number stations are coded SPY transmissions, which are on shortwave radio, they're accessible to anyone, but because they're coded with an unbreakable code, you have no idea, and it's just progressions of numbers or names. And they've recorded all these things, and you can download them from their website. So that's worth looking at.
Absolutely.
You want to get paranoid.
No, it's very helpful. And I mean, Kyriakidis makes the connection between the number stations and the Oracle at Delphi. The idea of things being communicated, but you don't know what's being communicated. So it's a kind of lovely. It's a piece for two singers, two pianos, electronics. He has a very good website, which probably has video or audio on it.
Terrific. I think